The hotel was alive with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of conversation. It was one of those exclusive events that only the wealthy could attend. A private gathering where millionaires and business leaders came together to celebrate deals, share ideas, and enjoy a night of luxury. Every corner of the room spoke of success and power, the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, the polished floors that reflected the warm golden lights, and the rich aroma of fine food that drifted through the air. It was a place where most people could only dream of being, and for those who were here, the night was a reminder of the life they had built with their money and influence. In the middle of all this, moving quietly and carefully among the guests, was a young waitress. She wore a crisp uniform, her hair neatly tied back, and a calm expression that hid the nervous flutter in her chest. To anyone looking at her, she was just part of the background, another staff member doing her job. But behind her eyes was a mind full of stories, memories, and dreams that no one in this room could ever guess. She moved from table to table, balancing trays with drinks and plates, offering smiles and polite words, and always keeping her pace steady. Her movements were practiced, careful, almost automatic, because in a place like this, even a small mistake could be noticed. And while she worked, she listened. She listened to the way the guests spoke, the tone of their laughter, the pride in their voices. She could hear conversations about investments, new businesses, and plans for the future. She wasn't supposed to pay attention, but she couldn't help it. There was something mesmerizing about being in this world. Even for a moment. At the far side of the room, a grand piano stood. A hired pianist was playing softly, filling the space with gentle melodies that seemed to make the chatter softer, more polite. The music floated over the tables like a quiet river, unnoticed by most, but not by her. She stopped for a brief moment, just to listen. Each note felt familiar, like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Her fingers twitched slightly, a reflex from long ago when she had been the one sitting at the piano. Her heart pouring into the keys, her soul speaking through music, but that was a long time ago. Life had other plans for her. She had once dreamed of being a musician, of playing in grand halls and sharing her music with the world. She had spent years learning, practicing, and perfecting her skills. There were times when she had imagined herself on a stage, the audience hanging on every note, tears in their eyes as her music carried them away. But those dreams had been interrupted, not by lack of talent or desire, but by life itself. Financial struggles, family responsibilities, and the harsh realities of growing up had pushed her onto a different path. The piano had been set aside, replaced by jobs that paid the bills but left her spirit hungry, and now here she was, working as a waitress in a room full of people who would never understand what it felt like to have a passion and be forced to let it go. She moved past the tables, but her eyes kept drifting back to the piano. She felt a strange mix of longing and fear. What would it be like to play again? Could she even remember the music well enough? The thought was both exciting and terrifying. For years, she had convinced herself that the piano was behind her, that it belonged to another life, a life that was over. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, that life whispered back to her. Despite the wealth and confidence that surrounded her, she felt invisible. The millionaires laughed, shared stories, and clinked their glasses, but no one noticed her beyond the service she provided. And yet, in that invisibility, she found a kind of peace. She could watch, she could listen, and no one would expect anything more from her. That invisibility was her shield. It kept her safe from judgment, from rejection, from failure. But it also kept her from the very thing she wanted most, her music. As the night went on, the energy in the room shifted. The guests grew more relaxed, more confident, and the chatter became louder. The pianist continued to play, but there were moments when he faltered, when his attention was distracted, or when the music ended abruptly between songs. And in those moments of quiet, she felt it, a pull, a nudge, a reminder of what she once had. Her heart beat faster, her palms grew slightly sweaty, and for a fleeting second she imagined herself sitting at the piano, the notes flowing through her fingers, the room holding its breath as she played. She shook the thought away quickly. Who would expect a waitress to play the piano in a room full of millionaires? The idea was absurd. She was just a server, a background figure, a helper. The thought of standing out, of drawing attention, filled her with fear. And yet, the more she tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. It was as if the piano itself was calling to her, reminding her that talent doesn't disappear, even when life pushes it aside. For a moment, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine it. She pictured the room falling silent, the guests turning to look at her, surprised and curious. She imagined the first notes of a song, trembling at first, then growing in confidence, the music filling the space, wrapping around the room like a warm blanket. She could almost hear the hush that would follow, the way people would stop talking, stop moving, and simply listen. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and thrilling all at once, but then reality returned. She was a waitress, not a performer. The piano was someone else's domain, the music someone else's to play. She moved on, serving drinks and refilling plates, trying to push the dream away. But her eyes kept finding the piano, her fingers tapping along absent-mindedly on the tray she carried, her heart echoing the rhythm of the music. There was something powerful in being unnoticed. It allowed her to observe, to learn, to remember. She noticed the subtle interactions, the way people carried themselves, the confidence that money could buy. And yet, she also noticed the emptiness that sometimes lingered beneath it. She saw the smiles that were forced, the conversations that were more about appearances than connection. And in those observations, she found a strange comfort. She may not belong to this world, but she could understand it, she could witness it. And she could remember that her life, though different, still had value, still had meaning, still had potential. As the evening progressed, the room continued to buzz with energy. The wealthy guests laughed and shared stories, oblivious to the young waitress weaving through the tables. She kept her focus on her work, but inside, the music in her mind grew louder, stronger. The memory of her past life, of the hours spent practicing, of the dreams she had once held so tightly, pressed against her chest, reminding her that some things never truly leave us. By the end of the night, something had shifted inside her. The fear, the doubt, the hesitation, they were still there, but so was a spark of courage. A small but undeniable voice telling her that maybe, just maybe, she could do something she never thought possible again. She didn't know what would happen, or how it would change her life, but for the first time in years, she felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. And as she cleared the last of the tables and prepared for the final rounds of service, her eyes lingered on the piano one last time. The melody that had played earlier still echoed in her mind, a reminder of talent, of dreams, and of the life that was waiting for her. If only she dared to reach for it. That night, the young waitress returned to her small apartment after her shift, tired but restless. She couldn't stop thinking about the piano, about the music, about the possibility of stepping into a world she had once loved and thought she had lost forever. She sat at her small kitchen table, hands folded over one another, and allowed herself to imagine it. The idea of playing in front of strangers, of risking embarrassment, of stepping out of invisibility, was frightening but exciting. And in that quiet moment, she realized something important. Sometimes, the smallest step of courage can change everything. The night ended with her, closing her eyes and letting the memory of the piano and the music fill her dreams. It was only a dream for now, but dreams, she reminded herself, were where everything began. She had learned to be careful with her dreams. Life had a way of taking the things you loved most and reminding you that the world didn't always make room for them. Music had once been her everything. It had been the reason she woke up early in the morning, the reason she stayed up late practicing, the reason she smiled through challenges. But life had forced her to put that dream aside. Money had been tight, responsibilities heavy, and the future uncertain. There were bills to pay, family to support, and survival to manage. The piano, once a place of freedom and joy, had become a memory she hid deep inside herself. Her family had never been wealthy. Every meal, every school supply, every small comfort had been a struggle to provide. Yet, they had supported her as best they could, recognizing the talent that shone through her fingers when she played. Her earliest memories were filled with the sound of music. She remembered the feel of her small hands on the keys, the way the notes danced under her fingertips, the way the room seemed to breathe with her. Her parents had watched her with pride, amazed at her dedication and skill, encouraging her to follow a path that would one day open doors, but life had a way of pulling her back. Her parents had grown older, their health declining, their energy spent on daily tasks just to keep the family afloat. There were unexpected expenses, emergencies, and responsibilities that could not be ignored. Music, once her guiding star, became a luxury she could no longer afford to pursue. She had tried to hold on, practicing whenever she could, but eventually, practicality won. She had put the piano behind her, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She learned to quiet the longing inside, telling herself that dreams were for other people, not for someone like her. Even so, music had never left her. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the pauses between her work, in the spaces where life's noise softened just enough for her to remember. It was in the soft hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the stairs, the tapping of her fingers against the table. It was a presence she could not ignore, a part of her that had survived the years of sacrifice. And tonight, as she moved through the crowded hotel, she felt it again, stronger than ever. The piano in the corner of the room seemed to call to her, reminding her that talent, once nurtured, never truly disappears. Her past was not just about music. It was also about discipline, determination, and moments of triumph she rarely allowed herself to remember. She recalled the small competitions she had entered as a child, where her hands had flown across the keys with a precision and emotion that drew smiles, applause, and sometimes tears from the audience. She remembered the late nights she had spent alone, practicing scales, memorizing pieces, perfecting fingering, and building stamina. Each note had been a step toward something greater, each piece a small victory in her journey. She had known the joy of creating something beautiful with nothing but her own effort and passion, but there had also been disappointment. There were times when she had tried to audition for programs or scholarships, only to be told that her family circumstances made it too difficult, that she didn't have the resources others did. She had been overlooked, dismissed, and sometimes even forgotten. Those moments had been painful, but they had also built her resilience. She learned to keep her head down, to work hard quietly, and to find satisfaction in her own progress, even when no one else noticed. As she moved through the hotel that night, balancing trays and serving drinks, those memories were like ghosts walking alongside her. She could feel the energy of her past life brushing against the present, and it made her heart ache with longing. She wondered if she would ever get another chance to touch the piano, to feel the keys under her fingers, to hear the music that had once been her world. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself that it was impossible, that the world she now moved in had no place for her talent, no room for her dreams, yet the pull was undeniable. Each time the pianist's music faltered, each time a song ended awkwardly or the melody slipped into silence, she felt a pang of yearning. It was a quiet, persistent voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. The thought made her both nervous and excited. She had spent so long convincing herself that her music was gone, and now the possibility of reclaiming it seemed both thrilling and terrifying. She didn't know how to face it, or even if she should. There was also fear. Fear of embarrassment, of failure, of stepping into a world where everyone would be watching and judging. She had spent years blending into the background, invisible and safe, and the idea of drawing attention felt unnatural, almost dangerous. She feared that her hands would tremble, that her fingers would forget the notes, that the music would not sound as it did in her memory. And yet the fear was accompanied by hope, a fragile, flickering hope that maybe the music inside her had not been lost, that she could still create something beautiful, that she could still surprise herself. Her life had taught her to be practical, to value security over dreams, and to accept limitations. But it had also taught her resilience, patience, and the quiet strength of perseverance. She had learned to adapt, to find joy in small victories, and to keep moving forward even when the world seemed determined to push her back. And now, standing in that luxurious hotel, surrounded by people who could never understand her struggles, she felt those lessons converging inside her. She felt the courage that had been buried under years of survival. Waiting for a moment to rise, she thought of the people she had met along the way. Those who had encouraged her even when the odds were against her. Teachers who had believed in her talent, friends who had cheered her on in small recitals, family members who had sacrificed so much to support her. Their voices and smiles, their confidence in her, filled her with a sense of possibility. Even if the world had told her no, they had said yes, and the memory carried her forward. As the evening progressed, the guests became louder, the music more fragmented, and the room more alive. The waitress continued her work, moving gracefully between tables, but her mind was elsewhere. She imagined herself at the piano, fingers brushing the keys, the notes filling the room. She imagined the expressions of the guests as they realized the sound was coming from someone they had ignored, someone they had assumed was just part of the background. She imagined the surprise, the awe, and even the admiration that could come from sharing something so personal, so true in a space where she had felt invisible. It was a dangerous thought, one that made her pulse quicken. But it was also liberating. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she could do it. That maybe the world had a place for her music again. She didn't know how or when, but the possibility alone made her feel alive, energized, and ready to take a step she hadn't dared to take in a long time. By the end of her shift, she was exhausted but inspired. The hotel was quieter now, the last of the guests lingering in small groups, discussing the night and preparing to leave. She carried the trays back to the kitchen, her hands steady but her mind racing. The piano sat in the corner, silent now, but calling to her in a way that was impossible to ignore. She knew that the moment would come soon. Something was about to happen that could change everything. Though she could not yet see exactly how, she took a deep breath, letting the memories of her past life fill her, letting the dreams she had thought lost rise to the surface. She reminded herself of the hours she had spent practicing, the talent that had been nurtured through years of dedication, and the courage that had carried her through challenges before. She realized that the piano was more than just an instrument, it was a part of who she was. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to see her again. That night as she walked home, the memory of the piano and the music lingered in her mind. The thought of playing, of stepping into a space where she could share her gift, was both frightening and exhilarating. She didn't know what the future held, but she felt something shift inside her, a spark of courage, a flicker of determination, and the quiet promise that her music would not stay hidden forever. And so, as she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed not of the struggles of life, but of the possibilities that awaited. She dreamed of the keys beneath her fingers, the notes rising into the air, and the moment when she might finally reclaim a part of herself that had been waiting all along. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her. The music inside her was alive, and she knew that one day she would find the courage to let it be heard. The night was moving forward, the luxury hotel buzzing with energy, laughter, and conversations filled with confidence. The millionaires and business leaders who had gathered for the exclusive event were enjoying themselves, unaware of the quiet tension growing in one corner of the room. The pianist had been playing steadily for hours, filling the space with soft melodies that seemed to calm the chatter. But then something unexpected happened, a sudden pause. The pianist's hands froze mid-note. He shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, and adjusted the sheet music in front of him, but the flow of the music had stopped. It was only a brief moment, barely noticeable to most of the guests, but the silence it created was enough to make the room feel different. Conversations faltered. Glasses clinked as someone absent-mindedly set down a drink. Eyes wandered, searching for the cause of the interruption. It was in that small pause that the possibility began to stir. The young waitress, who had been moving quietly among the tables, felt it immediately. Her heart skipped a beat, a mix of excitement and fear flooding through her. She had spent the evening balancing trays, serving drinks, and keeping herself invisible. But now the piano sat there, silent, almost inviting her to step forward. The thought was terrifying. Who would expect a waitress to play in front of these people? She was just a server, a background figure, someone who belonged in the shadows. And yet the idea kept whispering to her, growing louder with each passing second. Her hands shook slightly as she carried a tray to one of the tables. She set it down with care, forcing herself to breathe slowly, trying to quiet the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. What if she failed? What if she embarrassed herself? What if everyone laughed at her? The questions were heavy, pressing against her chest like invisible weights. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a spark. A small, bright flame that reminded her of who she was, of the hours she had spent practicing, of the music that had always been a part of her. The room had grown quieter now. The guests were beginning to notice the pause, glancing toward the piano, murmuring softly among themselves. Some were curious, others impatient, but none of them could see what she was feeling. They didn't know that just steps away, someone who had once dreamed of music greatness was standing at a crossroads. The decision she made in the next few moments could change everything. It could be a mistake, a moment of embarrassment she would never forget. Or it could be the start of something extraordinary. She paused by the piano, her fingers brushing the keys as if testing the waters. The cool surface felt familiar beneath her fingertips, and a wave of memories rushed through her. She remembered the late nights of practice, the small recitals where she had felt the pride of her talent, the encouragement from teachers and friends who had believed in her. She remembered the music she had created, the notes that had once danced under her fingers, and the power it had to move people. It was all still there, waiting for her. For a long moment she stood frozen, caught between fear and courage. The tray she had been carrying felt heavy, almost symbolic of the weight of the decision before her. Could she really do this? Could she step out of the shadows and into a room full of strangers, people who had no reason to care about her dreams or her past? The thought made her heart race, her palms sweat, and yet something inside her urged her forward. The pianist had recovered and begun to play again, but the melody faltered. It was not as smooth as before, leaving gaps in the music that only heightened the tension. The silence between notes was filled with anticipation, and she felt it like a physical presence pressing against her chest. She could wait no longer. The decision had been made in a heartbeat, born from years of longing, practice, and the quiet belief that she was capable of more than she had allowed herself to be. She moved toward the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. The room seemed to grow quieter with every movement, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Guests turned their heads, some curious, some confused, others amused. They didn't know her, didn't recognize the talent she carried, didn't expect the moment that was about to unfold. She felt their eyes on her, the weight of their judgment and expectation pressing down. But she forced herself to focus on the keys, on the music that had always been her refuge. Sitting down, she took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly but steadying with each passing second. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the memories of her past life guide her. The hours of practice, the challenges she had overcome, the moments of triumph and disappointment, all of it came rushing back, giving her strength. She reminded herself that the music was not just for them, the guests, but for her. It was a gift she had carried all these years, a part of herself that had never faded, and then, with the first gentle press of the keys, the room changed. A soft, clear note filled the air, delicate yet confident. It was as if the music itself had awakened something in the room, drawing attention without force, commanding respect without demand. The guests paused mid-conversation, turning their heads, listening without even realizing they were holding their breath. The waitress continued, her fingers moving gracefully, almost instinctively across the keys. Each note carried a story, a fragment of her past. A piece of her heart. As she played, the fear that had gripped her began to melt away, replaced by a focused calm. She no longer thought about the room, the guests, or their judgment. She was alone with the music, and that alone was enough. The melody flowed through her, strong and expressive, telling a story words could never capture. Her fingers moved with a confidence born of years of practice, each note deliberate, precise, and filled with emotion. She could feel the energy of the room shift, the tension dissolving into awe. The reaction was immediate and profound. Conversation stopped completely. Guests froze mid-laugh, glasses halfway to their lips, and eyes turned toward the piano. They did not know what to expect, and yet they could not look away. The music filled every corner of the room, wrapping around them, touching something deep and familiar that they had not realized was waiting. For the first time that evening, the atmosphere was no longer about wealth or status, deals or appearances. It was about something human, raw, and undeniable. She noticed subtle changes in the guests' expressions. Eyebrows raised in surprise, mouths slightly open in wonder, heads tilting as if trying to understand the source of the sound. The music was no longer just notes on a scale, it was a presence, a story, a bridge between the life she had lived and the life that might be waiting for her. She felt a quiet thrill, a sense of liberation, knowing that this was her moment, her choice. And her gift, the melody grew, gaining depth and intensity, yet never losing its grace. She allowed herself to feel, to remember, to pour her soul into the music. Every hesitation of her past, every struggle, every sacrifice, found its place in the notes. And the room responded not with applause or words, but with a silence so profound it was almost tangible. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than any conversation, louder than laughter, louder than money. It was respect, awe, an acknowledgement all at once. She realized then that she had stepped into a space that no one could take away from her. The millionaires, with all their wealth and influence, were witnessing something real, something that could not be bought or sold. Her music, born of struggle and dedication, had found its way into their hearts. And in that moment, she felt a sense of victory and freedom that was beyond words. By the time she finished, the room was still for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then slowly the sound of applause began to rise, polite at first, then growing louder, stronger, more genuine. It was not the applause of expectation, but of surprise, admiration, and deep respect. She sat back, breathless, feeling the impact of what she had done. She had risked embarrassment, risked judgment, risked everything to step out of invisibility, and in doing so, she had created a moment that no one in the room would forget. As the applause continued, she felt a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. The fear that had once seemed so overpowering had been transformed into something extraordinary. She had faced the unknown, relied on her talent and courage, and had been rewarded in a way that was both humbling and exhilarating. The room that had once seemed impenetrable, filled with people who might never notice her, had stopped, listened, and acknowledged her presence in the most profound way possible that night. As she returned to her work clearing tables with a new sense of purpose, she carried with her something more than just the memory of applause. She carried proof that her talent, her passion, and her courage could create change, even in the most unlikely of places. She had taken a step that few would dare, and it had led to a moment that would linger in her mind, heart, and soul forever. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the room transformed. It was no longer filled with the chatter of millionaires, the clinking of glasses, or the subtle hum of status and wealth. It was as if time had slowed, as if every person in that hotel room had become suddenly aware of something far greater than themselves. The music she played carried a story, one that only her heart could tell, and the audience, whether they realized it or not, was drawn into it. Each note was deliberate yet flowing, a perfect balance between precision and emotion. The melody started softly, almost hesitant, like a whisper that demanded to be heard. But as she continued, her confidence grew. The initial tremor in her fingers faded, replaced by strength and clarity. The music poured out of her, not just from training, but from experience, from a life shaped by struggle and perseverance. Every chord, every pause, every movement of her hands spoke volumes about who she was and where she had come from. The audience began to notice the shift immediately. Some stopped mid-conversation, their expressions changing from casual curiosity to quiet fascination. Eyes widened, heads tilted. Even those who had been sipping champagne or gesturing to colleagues froze, their attention captured completely. No one spoke. No one whispered. Even the chandeliers seemed to shine brighter as though reflecting the emotion that had suddenly filled the room. There was a raw honesty in her performance. It wasn't about perfection or technique alone. It was about feeling, about letting the audience experience what she had lived. She played with a passion that could not be faked, a depth that could not be bought. And the more she let herself feel, the more the room responded. The millionaires, used to controlling situations, influencing deals, and commanding attention, found themselves powerless in the presence of something truly human. The music transcended money, power, and status. It touched their hearts in a way they did not expect. Her thoughts drifted briefly as she played. She remembered the long nights alone at home, practicing scales while others slept. She remembered the encouragement of teachers who saw potential in her when no one else did. She remembered the sacrifices, the late buses, the skipped meals, the dreams deferred. And now, all of those moments converged into the song she was playing. Every struggle, every tear, every tiny victory was woven into the melody, carrying the story of her life across the room. For the first time that evening, she was not invisible. She was not just a waitress moving between tables unnoticed. She was a presence commanding the attention of an audience who had thought they had seen everything, who had thought they had experienced every kind of talent. And yet what she offered was new, authentic, and undeniable. The room had fallen silent, but it was not the silence of boredom or discomfort. It was the silence of awe. The silence of being fully present, the silence of being captivated. Guests began to lean forward in their chairs, drawn in by the music they could neither predict nor ignore. Eyes that had been skeptical softened. Expressions that had been rigid relaxed. Even those who had arrived with a sense of superiority felt humbled. They were not judging her anymore. They were listening, experiencing, and connecting with the music on a level that transcended their wealth and status. It was a rare moment, one that could not be bought or manufactured, one that could only be created through genuine talent, emotion, and courage. She allowed herself to smile slightly as she played. Not a full smile, not yet, but a small acknowledgement of the impact she was making. Each note built on the last, weaving a story that pulled the audience deeper into her world. The melody rose and fell, carrying both tension and release, sadness and hope, struggle and triumph. The room seemed to breathe with her music, each person caught in the invisible current of sound and emotion she had created. The guests' reactions were subtle at first, but gradually became more apparent. A hand lifted to a mouth in surprise. Eyes glistened. Some shifted in their seats, leaning closer to feel the music more fully. A few even closed their eyes, letting the notes wash over them, letting themselves be carried away by the story she was telling. None of them could have imagined that a young waitress, someone they had barely noticed, could command the room so completely with nothing but her talent and her courage. As the piece continued, she allowed herself to be fully present. She was no longer thinking about fear, about embarrassment, about what might happen if she failed. She was thinking only about the music, about the story it could tell, and about the truth of her own life. Each key she pressed, each chord she struck, was infused with emotion, with the depth of experiences that had shaped her. She felt liberated, as if the music had freed her from years of doubt, insecurity, and limitation. The room had become a place of shared emotion. The millionaires, the business leaders, the guests who had once been focused on appearances were now united in something far greater. They were listening, really listening, not just hearing. They were feeling, not just observing. And she was the one who had brought them to that point. Simply by being herself, by allowing her talent to shine without fear, she noticed subtle reactions among the staff, too. Other waiters paused in their duties, watching in quiet admiration. Even the hotel staff, who had been trained to maintain order and composure, found themselves caught up in the moment. The music had created a bubble around the piano, a space where the usual rules of hierarchy and wealth no longer applied. In that space, only the art and the emotion mattered, and it was hers to give. Time seemed to stretch. The piece she was playing grew more intricate, more layered, more expressive. She felt a surge of confidence and power, not in a boastful way, but in a way that was deeply personal. This was her moment, her chance to reclaim a part of herself that had been waiting for years. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but for the joy of creation, for the thrill of connection, for the fulfillment of a dream she had never truly abandoned. When she reached the final chords, she allowed them to linger just long enough for the room to absorb their weight. Silence fell again, this time heavier, more profound. It was the silence of awe, of realization, of something rare and precious. The guests were motionless, some leaning forward, some still with eyes closed, all of them caught in the aftermath of something extraordinary. And then the applause began. It started slowly, almost hesitant, as if the room needed to remind itself that this was real. But then it grew, spreading from table to table, louder, stronger, more genuine. It was not polite or forced, it was heartfelt. People who had once overlooked her were now standing, clapping, and cheering. Some were even wiping away tears, moved in a way they had not anticipated. She felt the warmth of their appreciation wash over her, not as validation, but as recognition of the truth she had shared through her music. She sat back, hands resting lightly on the piano, breathing deeply, savoring the moment. For the first time in a long while, she felt whole. The courage it had taken to step forward, the years of practice, the sacrifices, the doubts, they had all led to this. She had faced fear, taken a risk, and discovered something beyond expectation: the power of being true to oneself, of sharing one's gift without hesitation, of trusting that talent and heart can move even the most unexpected audience. As the applause continued, she realized that something inside her had shifted. She had always known she was capable, but she had never felt it so clearly, so undeniably. She had stepped out of invisibility and into her own light, and it had transformed not just the room, but herself. The millionaires, with all their wealth and influence, had witnessed something they could not buy, control, or command. They had been reminded that true talent and courage are rare, and when they appear, they leave an impact that is impossible to ignore. And in that impact, she found a new sense of purpose. She knew that this was only the beginning, that the world she had once thought closed to her might now have doors open. She did not yet know what opportunities awaited, but she understood that her life had changed in a fundamental way. The music had given her more than applause. It had given her belief in herself, proof that dreams could survive, and that courage could create moments of magic in even the most unlikely places. The room slowly returned to normal, the guests murmuring among themselves, discussing the unexpected performance, replaying it in their minds. But for her, the memory was already permanent. She had played, she had connected, and she had been seen. And as she finally stood from the piano, allowing herself a quiet smile, she knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. The applause slowly faded, leaving behind a quiet that felt entirely different from before. It was not awkward or uncomfortable, nor was it the polite clapping reserved for routine performances. This silence was filled with respect, admiration, and a subtle sense of awe. The young waitress sat at the piano for a moment, breathing deeply, letting her heart absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. She had taken a risk, stepped out of her comfort zone, and had been rewarded in a way that went far beyond expectation. For a few seconds, she simply allowed herself to feel the emotion. Relief, pride, and disbelief all swirled together inside her. She had always known she could play, but this was different. This was not practice, not a recital in a small hall, not the quiet applause of family or teachers. This was a room full of people who had not expected her to perform. People who had barely noticed her all evening, now fully captivated by her talent. It was a moment that could not be measured in money, status, or fame. It could only be felt. The guests began to speak quietly among themselves, sharing glances, nodding in appreciation, and remarking on the unexpected brilliance of the performance. Some approached her, hesitating at first, unsure if they should break the spell she had created. Their words were kind, sincere, and filled with genuine curiosity. They wanted to know more about her music, about the story that had been expressed through every note she had played. It was as though the music had given them permission to see her. Really see her for the first time, she smiled softly, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the applause and everything to do with being acknowledged as herself. For so long she had moved invisibly through life, blending into the background, unnoticed and uncelebrated. And now, in one act of courage, she had changed that. She realized that visibility, recognition, and respect were not just about status, they were about being seen for who she truly was, for the effort, passion, and talent she had nurtured through years of perseverance, even as she returned to her duties. Carrying plates and serving drinks, the energy around her had shifted. The guests no longer saw her as just a waitress. They had seen her as an artist, a person capable of extraordinary talent, and someone who could command attention through sheer authenticity and courage. There was a new sense of connection between her and the room, subtle yet powerful. She could feel it in the way people made eye contact, the way they lingered in conversation, the way their gestures carried more genuine warmth than before. As the evening came to a close, she began to reflect on what had happened. She remembered the fear she had felt just moments before sitting at the piano, the fear of failure, of embarrassment, of judgment. She thought of the years she had spent suppressing her dreams, the sacrifices she had made to survive, and the countless moments she had convinced herself that her music was behind her forever. And yet, all of that fear, all of those doubts, had been transformed into triumph in a single performance. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. Her mind wandered to the possibilities that now lay ahead. The performance had opened doors she had never imagined. Opportunities, connections, and new paths were suddenly visible, not as guarantees but as potential. She could feel the possibilities expanding before her, not as a dream, but as a reality that she had earned through her own talent, perseverance, and bravery. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever, that stepping forward, even in uncertainty, could create moments that changed everything. The audience, meanwhile, was abuzz with admiration. Some were discussing the unexpected impact of the performance, noting how someone so young and seemingly ordinary could command such respect. Others spoke in hushed tones about the authenticity and emotion she had conveyed, recognizing that what they had witnessed was not just skill, but a reflection of lived experience, passion, and resilience. Their words were filled with genuine respect, not flattery or obligation. They understood, perhaps for the first time that evening, that true talent carried its own authority, one that no amount of money or status could buy. Even her fellow staff members began to approach her with quiet congratulations. Their respect was evident in their smiles, in the way they spoke to her, in the subtle acknowledgement that she had done something extraordinary. For the first time, she felt fully recognized not just for her work as a waitress, but for the person she was, the talent she carried, and the courage she had shown. The sense of pride that filled her was different from any recognition she had ever received. It was not about approval, it was about truth. She had shown herself and the world what she was capable of. As the hotel staff began to clean up, and the guests prepared to leave, some approached her with invitations and offers. Not all were concrete, not all were immediate, but each carried the promise of opportunity. One guest, an influential music enthusiast, asked if she would consider performing at a private event, expressing genuine interest in her talent. Another mentioned a local venue that was always looking for new musicians, suggesting that she consider showcasing her skills there. These were not empty words, they were doors that had been closed before, now open because she had dared to step forward. She felt a mix of humility and excitement. She had not expected instant fame, nor had she sought it. Her goal had been simple: to play, to share her music, to reconnect with a part of herself that had been silent for far too long. And yet, in doing so, she had unlocked possibilities she could never have imagined. She realized that sometimes life requires a leap of faith and that courage often precedes opportunity. The act of believing in oneself, even when the world does not, can create results far beyond expectation, Walking home that night, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. The fear she had carried for so long, the uncertainty that had shadowed her dreams, the doubts that had held her back, all of it felt transformed. She understood now that her worth was not determined by her job, her circumstances, or the recognition she had received in the past. Her worth was tied to her passion, her dedication, and her willingness to take risks when it mattered most. That realization filled her with a sense of empowerment that she had never known before. The night was quiet outside the hotel, a stark contrast to the energy inside. She walked slowly, savoring the cool air, the sense of freedom, and the quiet knowledge that she had achieved something meaningful. She thought about the people she had met, the reactions she had witnessed, and the ways her performance had touched others. It was not about accolades or rewards, it was about connection. Her music had connected hearts, bridged gaps, and reminded everyone present that talent, courage, and authenticity are forces that cannot be ignored. As she entered her small apartment, she sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. The memory of the night's events played in her mind like a vivid film. The music, the faces, the awe in the room, and the applause, it all felt surreal, yet undeniable. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that she had not only reclaimed her music, but had also reclaimed a part of her identity that had been waiting for recognition. That part of her, once hidden, was now alive, vibrant, and ready to move forward into the future. In the following days, her life began to shift subtly but profoundly. She received messages and invitations, small at first, that gradually expanded into opportunities to perform, teach, and connect with others who valued her talent. But more importantly, she carried with her a renewed sense of self-belief. She knew that no matter what the future held, she had faced her fear, embraced her gift, and proven to herself that she was capable of extraordinary things. The confidence she gained was priceless, an internal transformation that no external circumstance could take away. The experience also reminded her of the power of authenticity. She realized that the audience had responded not just to her skill, but to her courage and sincerity. The music had been a reflection of her life, her struggles, her emotions, and her triumphs. That honesty resonated more deeply than any polish or perfection ever could. She understood that when one gives oneself fully, when one shares talent with heart and truth, it creates a ripple effect that touches everyone who witnesses it. Looking back, she saw the night not just as a performance, but as a turning point. It was a moment that symbolized courage, resilience, and the importance of embracing opportunities when they arise. She had stepped out of invisibility, defied expectations, and reminded herself that dreams are not defined by circumstance, they are defined by persistence, passion, and the willingness to act. The piano had been a bridge, connecting her past with her present, her fears with her courage, and her dreams with reality, and so she moved forward, carrying the memory of that night with her always. She knew that life would still bring challenges, that fear and doubt would return at times, and that the world would continue to test her resolve. But she also knew something vital. She had discovered her strength, embraced her gift, and created a moment that could never be taken away. The applause, the recognition, and the opportunities were important. But what mattered most was the belief she now held in herself and her ability to shape her own path. Her story, once defined by limitation and caution, was now defined by courage and possibility. She had learned that a